is that someone will play the whole piece. And 40 minutes is not that long. It's less than many Mahler symphony first movements or Tchaikovsky symphony first movements. And there are many symphonies that, as we all know, that are, an hour and 20 minutes long. So in that sense, it should be played, I think. But that's my first hope and dream, that someone will play the whole thing before I die. Then my second hope is that they'll play the whole thing and dance to it, which was the whole idea. And if you could hear the music, you could start to see the dance. And I've always been interested in dance. I've written other pieces with dancers, other ballets, 2 big ones that have been produced, and it was so meaningful to me. So this has been in my body for 15 years or 20 years. It's not like I just decided to do a dance piece. And also, as I compose, I actually dance, and I conduct, and I sing. I compose standing up. I sing all the parts and really physicalize it. And so I'm kind of already dancing it. And to me, it's such a natural translation into dance with all of my work, actually. Even the early pieces, Words of the Sea, which Mr. Boulez did in '95. That could so easily be danced, for instance. In a way, I think of that as a ballet, too. So the first hope is to get the whole thing played. The second thing is to have it danced. And that's very difficult because you need a large orchestra and a large dance and a large house, a large space with lights and costumes and scrims or whatever's needed. So it's a pretty big undertaking. Helios Chorus I, which Sir Andrew Davis premiered with the Dallas Symphony, essentially has the shape of a big crescendo, a 12-minute crescendo or something like that. It starts very delicately. It's quite rich in terms of rhythmic fields and timbre and harmonic fields, but it's generally delicate, and it builds and 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 stops. So it's the type of piece where the audience is kind of revved up and everybody claps really loud because it ends with this big ending. But of course, that's not the ending. The next thing that happens is you enter into the Boston Symphony Orchestra and the London Symphony Orchestra co-commission of Helios Chorus II. And that, the tail end of Helios Chorus I it overlaps just like for a minute or something like that. So you get this sort of big opening, and then it's very, very timeless, spacious, just as if as if everything was just standing still, with very delicate bells and inner voices contrapuntally floating through this texture. And this builds up very gradually. One of the aspects of Helios Chorus II is that there's a lot of pizzicato, lots of sounds that are with a short decay, and then there are other sounds with very long decays, and I constantly go back and forth between those kinds of sounds. And essentially, Helios Chorus II, over time, it's sort of fast, slow, fast, and then faster. It builds up again, and then we go into Helios Chorus III, which is all of a sudden in a big 6/8 section, a whole different metrical world that we haven't been in, very dance-like. And that goes through some slow sections and some fast sections, and the piece ends with a huge climax, very ritualistic climax, and then it just stops and we're left just floating there. The entire piece ends with just a long 1.5-minute solo for the concertmaster against a very, very colored and nuanced pedal point. Sort of as if you're just looking into the sun or something, and it gets brighter and brighter like that, and then the violin goes from just kind of floats down and then floats up. And I wanted to end this 40 minutes on a kind of very quiet and spacious moment, because a lot of it's been full of energy. It's kind of a very modest ending to 2 years of my life of work. One of the really interesting things for me, having worked at this for 30 years, and I hope I'll have another 30 years, I've really been trying over decades, not just recently, but to have my pieces sound spontaneous, as if they were being made up at the moment. Right there, that the whole orchestra was improvising, that there's a spontaneity and a flair and a concision of idea that feels kind of exciting, as opposed to a piece that's so calculated and like, then it sort of doesn't, it's like the airplane doesn't lift off. So I'm trying to have it be very much in flight and in action and with motion and spontaneity. Now that's very hard to get when you have you have 100 musicians with just a limited rehearsal time who are expert musicians and absolutely fabulous, but to keep that spontaneity in the sound is tricky. It takes great virtuosity, and it also requires an incredibly nuanced manuscript where you're able to really tell people what you want. And so this whole sense of improvisation, even though it's unbelievably nuanced, is a kind of a balancing act. How do you have something that's so precise and yet should sound spontaneous? And I feel that in Helios Chorus you can hear that it has a freshness or a spontaneity at all points. You never quite know what's going to come next, either from a local rhythm or a color or a juxtaposition or formally, or which ritual will next appear on stage if it was a ballet. And I like that, the inner life. When Helios Chorus II starts, I actually overlapped it with the very end of Helios Chorus I, sort of like giving you the clef note version of Helios Chorus I in a way. Even though Helios Chorus I is big crescendo, you just get the end of it, but you feel the energy. You're in that space for a very short moment, so you can kind of imagine maybe where we came from. And it also, I think, works very much as a beginning. And it's sort of interesting to start that way because it's like the trains have left the station, because the piece just starts, just boom, we're going. And it's kind of an exciting opening, like where by the time you're in it, you're really in it. And you feel that physically in your chair, that you're pulled into this piece, I think. And maybe because of the momentum that's been built up, that you maybe haven't heard, but it's been built up. And then we go, as I say, into this very spacious and warm, long phrase, very colorful and very quiet. And you really feel, therefore, like, okay, we're in another space. We have entered another, we're somewhere else. The sun has maybe gone beyond the horizon or something, and we're in another part of this cycle. If it was a ballet, I can imagine at this point all the lights would change and all the costumes would change and all the dancers would change, and we're somewhere else. And then little by little, it's almost like, okay, it's coming back, it's coming back, it's coming back. You know, and then it opens up again, almost the way what's been before. And I think that you really feel that the end, you'll feel satisfied when we get to this certain place at the end. I hope, because there's a very long phrase, I can't remember exactly, but let's say 150 bar phrase, which has different characters in it, but it's basically a big growing moment. And so it's a sense of like a deeply integrated flow that you'll feel. You can really physically feel this long phrase almost pulling the listener all the way, and then all of a sudden it's over.